Hi everyone, today we're going to take a look at this filter from K&F. It's part of their Nano X series of filters, which is in their higher range. And when K&F reached out to me to review their products, they asked me, what products would I be interested in? And this one kind of caught my eye because it's a combination variable ND filter and polarizer built into one unit. And full disclosure, they did send this filter out to me at no cost to myself. However, I haven't been paid, no money has changed hands, and as always, I'll give you my honest and fair opinion. I've always been a big fan of K&F Concepts, long before I started doing reviews here on YouTube. And, I bought a lot of their stuff with my own money, various filters and accessories, backpacks, sling bags, etc. And that's because I always found they offered, very good quality products at a very reasonable price. They're a great alternative to much more expensive brands. And this filter is no exception. It comes in this nice little faux leather carry pouch here with a magnetic flap. So you just open it here, you pull the tab, and it extracts the filter. Now taking a closer look, right away I could see and feel the difference. I mean, this is a very high quality, well-made filter. For example, when I'm adjusting the variable ND portion here, the ring is very well dampened and very smooth. And then there's a secondary ring here for adjusting the polarization. And again, this is very smooth and well dampened. And this is machined out of aluminum, and the tolerances are very, very tight. I mean, there's no play or wiggle in this filter at all. It feels very, very solid. And you can see they did a really nice job on the knurling here for making the adjustments. So it really feels good to work with. And the glass here is coated with 28 layers, which makes it more resistant to dust and water and scratches and things like that. So it's a very tough piece of glass as well. Now, I just want to talk briefly about polarizers, ND filters, and variable ND filters, and where this filter kind of fits in, because it's really kind of a combination of these things. Now, as photographers, we use polarizers to reduce reflections and cut through haze and increase contrast, and it can really make your images pop. So a lot of landscape photographers use these, and street photographers, like when they're trying to do reflections and cut through glass, maybe they want to frame things through a window. Polarizer is an indispensable tool for many photographers. Now, ND filters or neutral density filters are designed to reduce the amount of light that goes through our lens. And as photographers, we use them to slow our shutter speed down, to do long exposure photography. Say, for example, maybe we want to get smoother waterfalls or glassy seascapes, or maybe we want to get motion blur in a busy street scene. There's a lot of creative applications for ND filters in photography, and I'll give you a few examples later. But they come in two varieties. They come in as solid ND filters, or they can be variable ND filters. Now, solid ND filters like this one reduce the amount of light that goes through your lens by a specific amount. Variable ND filters are adjustable, like this one here, where you just rotate the ring, and as you can see, it changes the darkness of the lens, so it thereby adjusts the amount of light that is reaching your sensor. Now, the way most variable ND filters work is it's actually made of two polarizers. Typically, they'll have one circular polarizer, one linear polarizer, and I don't want to get into the difference between those, but they'll just put one on top of the other into a single casing, and then when you mount it onto your lens, you're just simply rotating the front element. And as I rotate it, you can see the variable ND effect. So it's getting darker, and then as I continue to rotate, it gets lighter. And if I continue to rotate, it'll get darker again, and on and on and on. Now, you might be asking yourself, since a variable ND filter is made of two polarizers, won't a variable ND filter have a polarizing effect and thereby negate the need to buy a separate polarizer? Well, to some extent that's true. When you put a variable ND filter on the front of your lens, you are getting polarization. However, you cannot control the angle of that polarization, which is the key to how polarizers work, is being able to rotate the polarizer in a way that rejects the angles of light that are causing the reflections and haze and all of that. A variable ND filter, you're simply rotating the front element, and all that does is reduce the amount of light that can pass through to your lens. To control the angle of polarization, you have to be able to rotate the rear element together with the front element at the same time. Then you can rotate or change the angle of polarization. However, the only way to do that, and some photographers have done this at their own peril, is they loosen the filter from their lens ring mount and rotate it that way. And we all know what can happen if you do that. And that's how this filter came to be. They designed it so that you can rotate the front element to adjust the ND index, and then rotate both elements together at the same time to change the angle of polarization. Now there's a few challenges that come into play when you design a variable ND filter, especially one where you want to be able to control the angle of polarization as well. Now the first problem is relatively simple, mechanical one, and that is how do you rotate the front element and then rotate the front and rear element at the same time? And K&F has done a beautiful job with that, and I need to show you the workflow to do that because it can be a little fiddly, but it's not bad once you get used to it. The second problem has to do with color shift, where your images can look a little bit yellow or a bit too warm when you're using the variable ND filter, and this is a very common problem in entry-level and even some mid-tier variable ND filters. More recently, the higher-end variable ND filters are now what they call true color variable ND filters, where it's mitigated that quite a bit. There's still a tiny bit of color shift, but it's really not noticeable unless you're looking at two images side by side, one with the variable ND filter and one without. And it's very, very easily corrected in post. Third problem that can happen is sort of the shading or vignetting, or even the dreaded what they call X pattern, where you try to dial in too much variable ND and you start to get this undesirable effect. And for the most part, again, the K&F filter has solved this problem. And one of the reasons these last two problems are very difficult to solve is just basically the physics of light. As you're rotating this dial here, you're blocking light from various angles and thereby reducing the amount of light that can pass through the element here. And as you increase this, you're blocking more and more light from various angles. But if you go too far, you're blocking more light from certain angles than others, and that's when you start to get that shading and X pattern. So what K&F has done is they've actually put in hard stops so you don't cross that line. So I can dial this back all the way, and there's a hard stop here. And then when I dial it forward to make it darker, it stops right here. There's a nice hard stop, so I don't go more than 5 stops. If it didn't have this and I continue to rotate this, that's when I would get the X pattern. So all of your high quality, high-end type variable ND filters will have a limited range, or ND, that you can dial in. And they do that on purpose specifically so you don't run into that problem. Now the other problem I mentioned earlier about the color shifting, where images kind of look too warm or yellow or maybe even magenta, green, blue, whatever, it's basically for the same reason, is that not all wavelengths of light or colors pass through the polarization equally, especially when you dial in a lot. And the polarization can also change how your lens coatings react, right? Your camera lens. So there's a lot of layers here and reasons why you get that color shift. However, again, K&F has solved this problem, I'd say about 95%, through some sort of new titanium coating that they're using, and also because of the very high quality glass and processing that they're using has really mitigated this effect to where it's almost a non-issue. So keep in mind that color shift and other artifacts that you get when you're using variable ND filters may never be 100% eliminated, just because of the nature of how they work through polarization. Because again, the coatings on your lens may react differently to polarization. And remember that your sensor has millions of micro lenses on it, and including filters on top of it, like the infrared cut filter, which can also be affected by polarization. But with that said, I've been using this filter with my own system and Olympus cameras, primarily with the 12 to 45 Pro, but other lenses as well, and I really haven't experienced any problems. So let me show you a few images of before and after, and also give you some creative ideas of how you can. So as I said before, it might be a little fiddly the first time you work with a dual action type filter like this. So what I found was it's best to first dial in the polarization that you want, if any, and then dial in the ND level that you want. So what I do is from my point of view, I rotate the dial all the way to ND2, and then I rotate it clockwise from my perspective until I get the polarization effect that I want. So I'm looking through the viewfinder, and I can see the reflections and darkness of the sky, whatever. And then once I've established the polarization that I want, that's when I dial in the ND level that I want. So what I'll do is I'll put my finger on the knurl here, and then I'll just push the other way until I get the ND effect that I want. Now, one of the most common uses of polarizers is to reduce reflections or to cut through haze and increase contrast, but actually a lot of automobile photographers use polarizers to reduce the reflections on the windshield and on the paint of the car to get much more dramatic shots. Now, I'm not a car photographer, but I thought I'd just demo that effect here on my car. And here's a shot I took at a recent meetup where I used this filter's polarizing effect so that I could see right through the windshield and get a very clear shot of the drivers. Now in this shot here, I'm actually getting the benefit of both the ND filter and the polarizer. So with the polarizer, obviously I'm able to see through the windshield and get a nice contrasty image of the car. But the ND filter dialed in allowed me to use a slower shutter speed so that I could still get this motion blur in the wheels while I was panning this shot. Now here's a typical shot of the MGM Casino at dawn on the Potomac River, and it's a nice shot, but then when you dial in the 5-stop ND filter, I was able to do a very long exposure here and smooth out all of the rough water there, and I also smoothed out the sky of any clouds, and I got this really beautiful glow of the sun just about to come up. ND filters are used a lot in flash photography, very commonly in portraits where you don't want to use high-speed sync or you can't use high-speed sync. Take a look at this shot here. This is just a regular ambient light shot. It's very flat, and I'm not very well balanced with the background. But then just dialing in like 2 stops on the ND filter, I was able to really open up my lens wide open to get a blurrier background, and then using the flash, gave me a nice catch light in my eyes and balanced the exposure very nicely with the background. However, I can make this shot even more dramatic by dialing the full 5 stops of ND and get a shot like this. And as you can see, the ND filter crushed most of the ambient light, so it's not filling in my face quite as much, and I'm getting a much more dramatic tonal range between the highlights and shadows on my face. Now for landscapes, polarizers can make a dramatic difference in the skies and foliage and even some seascapes, but this shot here is without any filter at all. And then when I added the polarizer and dialed it in, I got this shot here. And you can see I have much more dramatic skies. I also have more detail and contrast in the foliage there. Unfortunately, it's winter time, so it's not quite as obvious, but there is just a little bit more color saturation there as well. And there's actually a additional benefit if you want to convert this to black and white. And as you can see here, the skies maintain that tone or luminance as it did in the color image. So it's very similar to adding a red filter to black and white film for those of you that are familiar with shooting black and white film. And then one last picture I want to show you is this ICM shot, or intentional camera movement, where you move the camera up and down to get sort of this more surreal shot of this woodland. And using an ND filter allows you to slow the shutter speed down enough so that when you take the picture, there's going to be this nice motion blur. Now this is just a shot of my backyard, but what I wanted to show you here is that no effect on the image quality that this filter had in terms of resolution. So what I did was I cropped in to this little area here, which represents a 529% crop. And if you look at this image here, this is one image, and then this is the other image. And honestly, even side by side, and I know this would probably be hard to tell on a video, but I can tell you, looking at it here on my screen, I don't see any difference in resolution between these 2 images, which is a testament to the quality of glass being used in this filter. So let me sum it up this way. This is an excellent filter. I have no problems with the image quality, and any color shifting or polarization artifacts that I talked about are really going to be present in any filter at any price of this kind. So it will vary from camera to camera and lens to lens slightly, but I think K&F has done an excellent job at minimizing those kinds of artifacts to the point to where it really shouldn't be a concern whether you're doing photography or videography. So that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this review. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.